she asked about when we're dealing with trauma, because we know a lot of horses have trauma, and we're dealing with the trauma. What piece of this do we address the trauma directly, or how does that work, and what does it look like? And there's been a number of horses that we have addressed the trauma, but we will do it in a okay, I'm going to use Murray as an example. I want to talk about Addie as an example. Let's talk about Addie as an example first. Addie was one that Jesse had that we talked about yesterday that basically had PTSD. So she had trauma. You couldn't see what was triggering these dangerous to herself and other responses. So some things you could see the triggers, but some you just couldn't. So when you can't even see the trigger, you don't know what factor you're trying to address. You know what I mean? So you're like, I don't know. So in that way, and this is where I was saying to Jesse on the phone all those years ago, and Jesse's like, okay, I'll do whatever. But that she just, I said, just do targeting and stationary targeting, and it all seems silly, willy nilly kind of thing because it doesn't seem connected to anything. But it's when she's eating, she starts triggering. But it's like, don't deal with that. Deal with giving her, we're changing neural pathways and creating the endorphins, the dopamines, the choice, the freedom to do things, the safety of being able to say no to things. And all of those pieces end up being a way that they can feel safe. But also keep in mind, during that time, the classic conditioning is working in the best way. So now they start to feel, and remember, classic conditioning is that unconscious association, like Pavlov's dogs, target equals good feelings. Target equals good feelings. Well, pretty soon they see the target and they're like, I just feel good. I don't know why. So it becomes a way that we can, when they get a little triggered, we can redirect them using something that has become classically conditioned for them to find their way back to.
They can soothe themselves.
Yes, and we want, it kind of is a way that we can help them to self-regulate. And so when they find themselves in that place, nobody likes to be in that place. And our horses do not like to be in that fearful place. So if we can give them a way to go, hey, come on back here and invite them. We do not ever make them. We always feel like it's an invite. Say, you want to come back to me? And they typically will go back to it and you'll see them settle. So there's just building the classic conditioning with these basic elements that are mobile elements. We could take that little target with us anywhere. Then we have a way to help them. But pretty soon, you'll start to see them go there all by themselves. You'll start to see, and then you can find them, you'll see them settling a bit. So Addie, simply by being back in her home, that wasn't enough all by itself because she was so hardwired now for these new things. But by doing these things and practicing these things and building that good association, she could begin to let go of those things, begin to feel safe, which, as we talked about, really does help to change their perspective. Horses tending to be neophobic go around stranger danger. Everything's fearful, scary, new things, new sights, sounds, smells, situations are interpreted as, is that dangerous? And so, and it's been manifested by a lot of, escape and avoidance, as a training tactic.
Personality too.
Yes, and you definitely have genetic, and there's genetic changes can happen. A horse that has trauma in the wound, it can be passed on, changing their development and stuff. So it definitely can be something that has been a hereditary element. But so as we help them to find their way back there, their perspective does start to change, because instead of everything seeming like it's horrible and scary, as we start to introduce things and say new things are potential for reinforcement, you start to see them go, well, what is that? And now we have a horse who starts to not feel so strange or danger, and they're not going into fight and flight so quickly, so easily, and rehearsing those old neural pathways. We help them be able to find their way back to the better neural pathways, and then those become deeper and more rehearsed, and that becomes a way they could go. So as they get scared, if they can look to the target all on their own, they will. We've seen this a lot with stationary target use. We've seen it with thunderstorms. We've seen it with where they can just go there and it reminds them and brings them back to those places. So that's kind of a big sense. But I think Murray, my off-the-track thoroughbred, is a great example of this, because he came to me. He was a 4-year-old in the barn, and I had lost my bug. So I asked somebody who who had him, and I said, could I lease him? So I leased Murray. Well, one of the things that she had stated is that he always looks like a little boy. And this is because he always looked like this. And it was adorable in the essence of looking at it, but in the essence of what it truly was, you're like, that's not cute at all. Yeah, so he's a terrified little guy. So I went, as I began working with him, I realized he wouldn't relax around anything at all. He didn't like people, he didn't like other horses, he didn't like being groomed, he didn't like being ridden, he didn't like in, he didn't like out, the only time I could see him relax is if I was looking at him in his stall and he didn't know I was looking at him. Because if he even knew a human was looking at him, he changed. But if you could sneak up and see him, you could see the relaxed Murray. And so I realized, okay, this guy, and I remember saying to myself, and saying it out loud to him, I have to classically condition the whole world for you. And that was my thought. I thought everything needs a new association because everything creates worry. So now I couldn't go out and just think I'm just going to classically condition the whole world because that's not really a practical thing. So what I did is I set out to use operant conditioning to teach him stuff, to begin to classically condition elements of his life, to start to classically condition my presence. And so I started teaching him stuff and giving him, free will to do things or not do things and say no, and making sure it was all joyful and fun and, and pretty soon he got better. And I will tell you too, he couldn't be turned out. I turned him out with Minty. Minty is the most zen horse. He's raised babies. He's like, he's super takes care of other horses. Yet he's still playful enough. I put Murray and him together, and I could see Murray was frozen, like, I do not move. And this was Murray's go-to, was freezing. And he was frozen. He's like, I do not move because if I move, I might be chased, is what it felt like to me. That if he lit up any bit, that he might get Minty chasing and displacing him, which probably comes from him being a baby. But being on the racetrack, I think he also was quite sensitive to others encroaching on him because he would kick horses who got near him. And so first he froze, and Minty kind of started playing with the ball and teaching him how to do that. And then pretty soon, Murray was a bully to Minty. So I know that came out of his deep-seated angst. He didn't know how to relax and chill. So then I was like, well, now you can't be with other horses because I can't have you just tormenting everybody you're with. And so I had to pull him from other horses for a while. But I kept working with him, making sure his life was full. And pretty soon, he'd be startled at stacks of, pavers. And then I said, okay, I get it. And I'd take him away and say, let's regroup for a minute. Let's bring it back down. And I'd ask him to get a little closer. He'd just touch the target until that first day when I recognized this. He got closer and closer. I was reinforcing that I'd take a break, let him settle a bit. And then finally, as we got, the target was like this far from it, he went past the target and touched the pavers. And you could see him go, oh, they're just pavers. He realized now that they're inanimate bricks sitting there. And so he started to recognize that he could quell his own worry, or I recognized he could, but I needed to take him. So for a while, we went from thing to thing to thing to thing, touching all the things so that he would see new things. He's like, let's go see that. And at first I'd feed that. And then pretty soon, when this was looking pretty confident, I'm like, good boy. And just walk on and start feeding as we walk past it. And then one day we were walking out of the barn and his things were things on the ground. Somebody had flattened boxes and put them on the ground. And we were walking out of the barn to go and I could startle and then let go of it and just go back to walking. Now, he didn't check in with me like, did you see what I just did? Mm-hmm. He totally took himself from over threshold, fight or flight, I'm frightened, I'm scared, to, it's just nothing, and just continued walking. And I realized that day that we had made a huge amount of progress in his psychological state, his mental state, his emotional state, his perspective. So instead of him looking and think, that is going to kill me, and it was his reality, that I will die from these things, that's what his perception is, to him kind of go, it's nothing, and being able to find his way back. And that's part of what that looks like. And it was probably a 2-year process till I saw him confident enough to where anybody could go to him and do things. Because it used to be, if you tried to touch his belly, particularly his sheath, he's gonna, say, no, you don't. And pretty soon then you'd see, like if I go here, you could see him go, well, let's just see how it goes. And him, instead of feeling defensive, him saying, well, let's see, everything else you've done has been good. And I'd say it took him about 2 years till he trusted all sorts of people, not just me. He trusted me much sooner, and there was a point too where we were walking by one area, and a big dog came running out behind us. And he flinched. He actually startled. And I thought that was a really big day. And a lot of people, I know it was a big day, but a lot of people said, I don't want to ride that horse. I want to ride the horse who's still. I'm like, but that horse who's still is a horse who bolts out of nowhere because he's keeping it together, but he's really not mentally together. Yeah. So for him to feel confident enough to be able to display that was a huge thing. Yes, right. He could look at it and go, I'm startled by this, and feel safe enough to do that without getting a correction or a repercussion, because for some reason he was shut down about that. So does that help you?
Yeah, definitely.